Hi everyone, I am Lee Meagle. I'm the editor here at the Web Host Industry Review, and I would like to welcome everyone to another one of our WHIR webinars. Today's session is called A Hosting Company's Journey into Cloud Services, and it's going to feature a presentation from Tony Lucas, who is founder and Senior Vice President of Product Development at Flexiant, and he has actually been through that journey and actually a little beyond, as I imagine we will see in here. I'm going to give Tony the presenter controls right now so that he can get his stuff organized while I take care of a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, questions. We're going to save a few minutes at the end of the session for your questions. However, you could feel free to submit them throughout the session using the question function in the webinar software. I will be keeping an eye on those throughout the presentation, but as far as actually putting the questions to Tony, we're going to leave that until the very end. If you do ask a question and it doesn't get answered either because we run out of time or maybe it's a bit too specific to address in a forum like this, rest assured that we will have a record of all the questions asked and who asked them, and somebody will reach out to you via email after the webinar. Or if you have a question that you would rather not ask in this sort of public forum, you can use some of the contact info that will be on screen later to reach out directly to Tony or somebody else at Flexiant. As always, there will be a video archive of the webinar available if you want to revisit a slide or a part of the presentation or share it with somebody else. It will be in the archives at thewhir.com/webinars as of early next week. And it'll be there alongside of a lot of our other great past webinars, so you can also check that out. Now, without any further ado, let's get things started and turn it over to Tony. Tony, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi Liam, and thanks for that. Yes, as Liam said, I'm the founder and Senior Vice President of Product at Flexiant. And what I want to do today is tell you a story, pretty much, which is what I hope will resonate with a lot of you, the hosting companies and service providers, and some of the problems you might be going through now. And it's basically the story of what we did and why we've now created the software that we have that ultimately we sell to hosting companies and service providers to solve these problems. But we actually originally created it to solve our own problem because we used to run a hosting provider. So what I want to do is take you through a bit of the history as to why we did it, when we did it, some use cases, talk about various customer problems, and just go from there basically, and hopefully it will be a useful session. It isn't a product pitch, it isn't saying our product is any better than anybody else's. It's more about telling you our story in the hope that it can help you with yours. So without any further ado, very quick background on Flexiant, because I'm presuming most of the people on the call won't know very much about us. And we actually date back all the way to '97 effectively, so 15 years now. I started a small hosting company. It grew reasonably well back in '97, and we started off doing shared hosting, and then much like many other typical hosting companies, we did domain names, we did email, and then we progressed on to dedicated servers and co-location, and then moved on to managed servers. It's a very, very typical progression. But I had a very bad habit of never actually saying no to a customer when they wanted us to solve problems. And this led us to gain a really good reputation for being the company to go to solve some slightly more thorny issues. And so if we fast forward to 2004, we start getting hit with a variety of issues, use cases, and scenarios, which I'm going to go through some of the major ones shortly, from customers. We kind of came to the conclusion of traditional hosting just doesn't cut it. The way it's too expensive, it's not flexible enough, it just doesn't work for what our customers actually need. And we realized at this point that virtualization was the key to solving this, but not in the way that a lot of people thought about virtualization then, and to be fair, a lot still don't think about it this way now, which is that virtualization for us wasn't about being able to share resources and make it more efficient, which was great and is the obvious win. Cutting a dedicated server into 10 or 20 or 30 and selling a small chunk of it off each is a great use case, but for us, being able to use virtualization to abstract away the workload, the virtual machine, from the hardware and separate them was a real eye-opener as to what that would enable us to do. And so we came up with the idea to build what at the time, we were building as a service, and in 2007 we launched, which became Flexiant. We came up with the idea to basically build an infrastructure as a service platform. Back then, we didn't know what it was. No one was calling it cloud. No one was calling it infrastructure as a service. We just knew it was cool and was going to directly solve the problems that we were actually having, and that was our entire focus on it. So, October 2007, we launched Flexiant, public cloud platform. And I remember it well because the day we launched it, TechCrunch covered it, which was interesting. I think I had 200 sign-ups for it in the first 2 hours. That kind of took me back a bit, and it was great. And we had plenty of bumps along the road in terms of we're the second company in the world to do this, and it was everything we were doing was very bleeding edge, but it was real fun, and we learned an awful lot in doing it. And fast forward a bit to 2009. And by this point, I've been doing hosting for 12 years, been doing it for quite a while, and we realized, we thought in 2007 when we launched, we thought we had literally 6 months to a year's head start on the rest of the hosting market in this area, when 6 years was closer than 6 months, and in terms of the general market. And so in 2009, we kind of came to the conclusion of, hang on, we've got some pretty neat technology here. This could make sense actually selling this, licensing this technology to other hosting companies. And so we sold the hosting business at that point, and span into Flexiant, focused on developing the software, the technology we built to sell to other service providers to solve the problems that we had, and I'll go through them. So that's the piece I want to really focus on today. Fast forward from 2009 till now, we've renamed the software to more directly focus on what it's called, so it's now called Flexiant Cloud Orchestrator. We released version 3 last month. The great guys at Infotech, who are a great analyst company, completely independent, I should point out, gave us an award for that as well, which is awesome. And in fact, the award they gave us as Trendsetter was for version 2, which we've just released version 3, so that's pretty cool. And we've just now launched 4 different editions because we're addressing different parts of the hosting market. So there's 4 different editions at different costs, etc. But I don't really want to focus on that bit. It's more about the journey. So I shall move on. So some of the typical hosting industry challenges that we saw and we think still exist, certainly a lot of hosting companies, and this is very true with the companies we speak to. And I'm not tarring everyone with the same brush here. Not everyone's the same. Some companies are better organized than others. Some, they don't have these problems for different reasons. But so this is a deliberate generalization. So if you don't agree with me, by all means, call me out on it. But it's not designed to fit everybody. So one of the classic problems we had was that we were, in the UK at least, it might be slightly different in the American markets, but in the UK, in the early 2000s, there was a glut of data center space, and it cost nothing. And the margins you're making on co-location of dedicated servers and managed servers was brilliant. And then power costs suddenly kicked in and rose a lot. Our data center space cost rose 500% in the space of 3 years for the same space. So all of a sudden, power usage became a much bigger issue. And I got really frustrated with having lots and lots of customers who were on their own managed server because they wanted a little bit of security or they wanted a little bit of segregation compared to shared hosting, but they were barely touching the server. They weren't using more than 5% of the resources. And I'm sitting there going, it's all my power that's being wasted. So that's what got us thinking about virtualization, but we realized that wasn't just enough. High administrative overheads. So it was a real challenge for us. We were installing brand new dedicated servers every single day, and there was a real amount of overhead in doing that. And the problem was, I'll address this in more detail later on, but the problem was that to get a brand new customer up and running usually took quite a while to do, a huge amount of time. But if a customer wants a dedicated server, they don't really want to have to wait days or weeks for it. and it depended on the more complex the configuration the customer wanted, the trickier that became. And the real problem with this was lack of agility in provisioning and management. And what's the best way to describe this? There's a lot of dedicated server companies out there right now that can, and have done for quite some time, can sit there and say, oh, we can spin you a brand new server up in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour. Well, that's great, but what if I only want it for an hour and then I want to be able to give it back again? Oh, no, you're in a month contract or a 6-month contract. So being able to spin it up in 10 minutes is pretty irrelevant, because being able to spin it down again is just as important for a lot of uses. And so all of these issues together, basically one of the real problems we had was inefficient CapEx usage, because we'd be buying custom specs in, we'd be buying custom hardware for different customers. They'd then upgrade, we'd have different problems trying to recycle it or trying to get customers to reuse it. If a customer wanted a particular machine, but then we had to change the specification slightly, going and upgrading the RAM and everything else in the data center just cost a lot of money compared to what the margin was on the server and what the customer was prepared to pay. And you end up in a position where business as usual was just trying to keep on top of all this stuff, was swallowing up all the resources, and that's the point of the hamster running on the wheel, because it kind of felt to us like all we were doing some days was running around in circles just trying to keep up and not innovating and not actually managing to achieve anything new as a business. So these are all the things that sat there and bugged us and thought, there's got to be a better way of doing this. So the second part of this, that was what bugged us. And then there was another part which I call customer pain points. And these were things that bugged the customer and us. And these are the 4 key pain points I see in a customer lifecycle that traditional hosting doesn't help with. And these were hurting us. So basically you have a brand new customer comes along and they say, okay, I want this particular specification. Well, why do you want that specification? And you give them price and it's too much. Well, okay, give me some more information. You end up with a complicated, lengthy sales cycle of discussing the configuration with them. They're not certain what they want, but they're trying to keep the costs low, and so you end up trying to find the right fit for them, and that can take days, if not weeks, to specify. Once you've finally got the configuration the customer wants, you've then got, okay, depending on how organized you are, again, I'm generalizing here, you might be as bad as, okay, now we need to order the server. Okay, now the server's in stock. Now we need to get the server racked. Okay, the server's racked. Now we need to get the software configured. Now we need to get the applications configured. Now we can finally hand it over to the customer. There's some companies that have done an awful lot with that in dedicated servers and can bring that time down significantly. But I still know an awful lot where that's days and days and days of work and time lost. And so that's a real pain point, because that's just money down the drain to begin with, especially if your customers pay monthly. That when the customer comes on board, you've had to throw money away on the CapEx of the box, but you're also then throwing money away on setting that up and everything else. And then, so that's bad enough, but you get the customer set up, and as everyone will know, life is sweet with dedicated server customers when nothing goes wrong and they don't want to change anything, they don't want to leave anything, they just sit there month on month very happily, and that's where you make your money. The minute a customer actually wants to change anything is where it can get complicated. And the classic example I use for this, and it's one that kept hurting us back in the early 2000s, was you'd get a customer who's got their own dedicated server and it's got RAID 1 on it, it's got 2 disks in it, and it's a 1U box. And they'd go, I need more disk space. We can't put any more disks in that server. And we go round in circles thinking about the best way of doing it. And what we end up with in terms of minimizing downtime for the customer, which ultimately is the most important thing, is, we'll put you on a brand new server that's got more disks and we'll copy your data over. So you end up going through the whole provisioning cycle again. You end up with being able to, having to provision the new server, provision the applications, copy the data over, make sure everything still works. Huge amounts of time. And yet you might have only made an extra few $100s a year or a few hundred extra pounds a year in revenue, and which you literally, by the time you've taken all the work involved, you may not be making any money out of it. And the problem is, every time you have a situation like that, you are causing the customer pain as well, because they're having to think more about it, and as a result, you increase the risk of them leaving. And that certainly happened to us. We had ones where we turned around and quoted this, and they went, "Oh well, I might as well look around. If it's going to be this complicated for me, I might as well look elsewhere as well." And we did pretty well at keeping a lot of them, but you have to do everything you can to stop a customer ever needing to look around elsewhere. And then finally, customers actually leaving. And the problem with customers leaving quite often is they'd be on a 1-month contract or a 1-year contract or whatever it might be. Trying to recycle their hardware back into the sales cycle could be quite complicated sometimes. And there is some companies in this industry who've got it down to the fine art. There's even one that does a reverse Dutch auction, which is a pretty cool idea. But generally speaking, what you ended up with was giving the sales guys, here's a list of old kit we've got, try and match that to a customer to sell it to, so it's not sitting here wasted. And one of the classic ones I always remember was we had a customer that we built this really high-spec kit for. I think we spent $14,000 on a single server for them. It was a year's contract, and after a year they left, as they were entitled to do. And we're left with this thing going, well, it's still worth a lot of money. Could we find a customer to take that server on? No, because it was too specific in terms of specification. We just couldn't, and it ended up sitting there being used as a random box for testing things on when it was still worth thousands of dollars. And all these things are basically they're the hidden costs in some ways of hosting providers, and the hidden hurt points that until you've actually walked away and separated yourself from those issues, you don't actually realize how much they might be affecting you. And this is what I mean by in the previous slide, the business as usual dragging you down. So that's some of the problems we saw, and some of the pain points, and some of the frustrations that drove us to build this software. What I want to move on to now is to take you through, and I've anonymized these, but these were literally 3 or 4 specific customer types that came to us, and or were already customers that got affected by traffic problems or load problems that having an infrastructure as a service platform would have either eased or eliminated. And what I'm curious to see is how much this resonates now with customers that you've got, because as time went, as more and more people got broadband and constantly on internet access, which these days not having that seems completely bizarre, but this is when you started to see a lot of these problems come in. And so we came to the conclusion this problem was going to become more and more prevalent. So the very first one, for those people that have been around the industry long enough to remember Slashdot, obviously it's still running, but it's not as popular as it used to be. Mind you, neither is Dig these days. Was what was known as the Slashdot effect, or that became the Dig effect. But basically, being mentioned on a very, very popular website, but your website getting mentioned on it, and you suddenly getting an awful lot of traffic. Now, the real problem with this, and this happened to one of our customers in January 2004. I remember it very well because it was a customer on a shared web hosting server, and it killed the server. And it killed the server because it was maxing its network port out in terms of the traffic it was doing. And so all the other websites on the server were dead. And so we did the only thing we could do to begin with, which was switch the website off, which is obviously a horrifically bad thing to do to a customer, but we had to try and protect the other customers. So just when this particular website's getting all the traffic you could ever dream of, we had to turn around and go, no, sorry. And so we switched it off, and all the other websites were still dead because it was now doing the network ports limit in 404 requests because it was getting hit that hard. And so in the end, we actually had to take the site the website out of DNS just to get the other websites on that share host back into, well, I can't remember if we took it out of DNS or we repointed it somewhere else, but we disabled the DNS hitting that particular server anyway, until the website disappeared off of the front of Slashdot. And the minute it disappeared off of Slashdot, the problem went away again. So that's a particularly tricky one to deal with some customers, because what you'll find is the customer's never going to say, oh, I'm going to go and buy lots of equipment in advance, or I'm going to take dedicated servers, or I'm going to make sure that I'm on a super scalable solution that's costing thousands of pounds just in case I hit the front of Slashdot or Dig or what would it be these days, Reddit or something like that. And so that was a really interesting for us, and that was the very first inkling that there's got to be a better way of doing this for us. And the next one, hopefully you guys will find quite amusing, because the next one that had a major impact on our thinking, believe it or not, was a pig farm. And you might go, what on earth has a pig farm got to do with hosting problems and infrastructure as a service? Well, this particular pig farm that was in the UK had a fly-on-the-wall documentary, one of these reality TV shows back when reality TV was still cool. And so their unique problem was, for 1 hour, one month a year, on a Tuesday night at 10 o'clock at night, as soon as the TV program went off, their website traffic peaked 10,000% for an hour, and literally everyone went to their website, went to their shopping cart, and went and bought lots of sausages and pork and whatever else you buy from a pig farm. And so the problem was that their website was instantly keeling over with this. And after the first time, they didn't realize it was going to have this impact. And after the first time of that happening, we moved them onto a dedicated server, and we set it all up. And literally, we did everything we could, and we were sitting logged into the server watching it. I'm sure a lot of you guys, this will ring bells with. The closing credits of the TV program came up, and within 20 seconds the server was dead, completely unresponsive. And so the next week we set them up a complete load balance cluster, and we had 7 servers running, and it all went great. And that's how we continued doing it after that. But how do you get a customer that's a pig farm, you can imagine the margins in it aren't great, to go and say, right, so for 4 hours a year, you need this capacity. So we're going to set you up with 7 servers and a load balancer configuration for the entire year. And that's going to be X thousands of pounds or dollars. It doesn't really fly, does it? And so, again, this was a real impactful one for us, which is, here's a really interesting use case where someone that really needs this traffic, and it's a real time they need it, and they need to be able to scale, but they can't afford to spend the money all year round to do that. So that was a really other interesting one for us, and we learned a lot from that experience. But we did get their website up and running, and it all worked out in the end. And the pig farm is still going; it's going very well. So another one was, I pick a rally car here in particular, but we've had a number of different sporting clients of different kinds. We've had racing clients, and we've had Premier League football clubs, or the Americans listening, soccer clubs, and they have some really interesting traffic problems, because they'll sit there and they'll have a steady flow of traffic, which obviously off season is a lot lower, during the season is higher, before and after the game and around the game is extremely high. So that can be fairly well predicted, and that's fine. And the traditional way of doing that again is, okay, big low bounce cluster, you'll be wasting some capacity, and that's still annoying, because it's funny, you know, these guys pay ridiculous amounts of money to their football players, but trying to get them to give you an entire year's worth of service, what they pay one of their stars for about 3 days, is surprisingly difficult, and they want to forecast all these costs in advance and everything else. And so that again is a really tricky problem. And the other issue we always had with this particular scenario, whether it was football or racing or whatever it was whenever any news came out that wasn't necessarily expected, a player transfer or a disqualification or whatever it might be, the website traffic would soar, and they wouldn't necessarily be able to give us any advance notice of that. So you ended up having to have a situation where you had a flexible solution that they could scale up when they needed, when they could proactively say, right, we know we're going to be busy, but also could react literally within seconds, or certainly within a couple of minutes, to needing demand. So that was another particularly interesting one, and we had several clients like that of different kinds that we learned a lot of valuable lessons, and we've put all these experiences into the product. So Popstars was another one. I have no idea who this particular person is, but Popstars was another one. We ended up doing hosting a number of websites for different pop stars and celebrities at different points. And again, similar issue but different to the sports people, which was you could sometimes predict when there was going to be extra traffic. For example, one of the world's biggest pop stars, we ended up hosting their website, and I remember they decided without telling us that they were announcing a new concert tour. Well, you can imagine the traffic on the website went through the roof, and the web server, which was all dedicated, struggled to cope. And it's a case of, okay, so there's got to be flexible ways to adapt to this, because what you don't want to do is spend the entire night running around, working your butt off trying to actually help this customer, who at the end of the day isn't going to be happy with you anyway, because the problem with IT typically is it's always your fault. Even if it's not your fault, it's still your fault. And that's unfortunately just the way it goes. And so these are genuinely some of the experiences that have really shaped exactly how we've done this, and exactly what things that have actually affected how we've thought about the product and what we've done with it. So to move on from there, time's getting on. So hopefully some of this resonates with some of the people listening. I think it's also worth being honest and showing the flip side of this, in that when we talk to different hosting companies, we get a number of very common objections back, and these are across the board. In terms of the size of the hosting company, I've had these from hosting companies that are doing $1 million turnover, and I've had it from companies doing $100 million turnover. And I think it's worth calling these out. So one of them was, customers not asking for cloud. They don't want cloud services. They don't want scalability and flexibility. Well, guys, they do. They're just, because they can see that you don't actually offer it, they're going elsewhere. Seriously. So many hosting companies I've spoken to that have said, no, customers aren't looking for it. 6 months later, they're coming back to me and saying, we're losing customers to Amazon because they're doing all their test dev on Amazon because it was much more flexible to use. And so they've just gone into production on it. So watch out for that. If your customers aren't asking you, go start asking them what they're looking for. One of the other ones was from a number of hosting companies where traditional hosting had actually matured as an industry quite nicely in the late 2000s, with a very simple analogy of just about everyone that needed a website had a website. And they were growing, and they were doing more bandwidth and everything else, but it wasn't a radically maturing industry like it was in the 90s when I started. And actually, it's picked up a bit since then, and the reason it's picked up is that more and more companies are now looking to the cloud, and I use that in the deliberately subverted marketing term it's been twisted into. So basically, they're looking to the internet to host their traditional internal applications out on the net in general. And this is great. It's awesome time. It's why one of our catchphrases is, this is the decade of the service provider. And so a lot of these guys are going, well, I'm growing. I'm doing 10% a year growth, and last year I was only doing 2%, or the numbers might be much bigger than that as well. Why do I need to care about this cloud thing? And the reality is, just because you're growing a bit, you are almost certainly still missing out on a significant opportunity. Look at Amazon, for example. We still don't know what their exact numbers are, but we now know that EC2 alone is a multi-billion-dollar business, and that's business that should have gone to existing service providers. Another one is I'm quite happy just selling servers. I'm pretty much just doing real estate. I can keep shipping these servers out as long as the cows come home. I can buy the servers in. I can do the margins on them. I can ship them out to customers. What you're going to find is that existing as these customers actually look to move more and more things out from internal IT out to service providers, they're starting to look for service providers to deliver more value. They're looking for you to step up and actually deliver more, whether that's flexibility in how it's sold, whether it's value-added services or SaaS applications or pre-configured applications. There's a whole range of things. They're not just looking for tin or servers anymore. And so that in itself, in the same way that shared hosting is completely commoditized, there's no added value in this. You need to be looking at how you can actually add value and differentiate yourself from your competition. And if you're already growing in this market, you are no doubt already differentiating, but you need to think how I can grow on that. And finally, my favorite one, isn't cloud just VPS and marketing? And I love reading the cloud forum on web hosting talk because so much misinformation in there. It's quite hilarious, and I think it's everybody with an agenda. There's an awful lot of people that are selling VPSs and calling it cloud, and there's nothing wrong with VPSs. And there's a blog post I've got going up early next week, actually, I think, that compares the different types of models. And the VPS model is great. We've got a customer that's just launched that actually is offering VPS and cloud, two entirely different models of how it's built and how it's provisioned using our software. But it makes sense for their customers. This isn't me criticizing VPS, but having a whole bunch of dedicated servers that you're cutting up into chunks and selling a virtual machine to a customer on a monthly basis, and if they then want to add more RAM to that, they upgrade the monthly fee for that server. People were doing that 10 years ago. That's not new. There's nothing cloudy about that. If we come back to my point right at the beginning about the value we saw is in abstracting the virtual machine from the infrastructure. And that's where the value is, because that gives you the agility to scale for customers to burst up and down, to have the flexibility they need. So cloud done right, and this is not me trying to define cloud, because I think nobody quite agrees, but if you want to go and have a look, the NIST definition, NIST, is the one that people probably agree on more than any other one. But at the end of the day, just having a VPS service and badging it cloud is going to hurt you in the long run, because actually your customers will see right through you and go, you know what, this isn't delivering the flexibility I need. I'm off to someone that's actually really doing it. So how would you actually stay competitive in this market? I've talked about how it's changing. I've talked about how it's actually advancing in terms of what our customers are looking for. I've talked about there's a lot of advantages there. There's a lot of risk as well. Every new market, and every time a market changes, and we've seen this happen in hosting several times already, there's the big hosting companies right there now, some of the biggest ones, like the planets of this world, didn't exist sort of 10 years ago or so, or barely existed. And you had guys like the Planet and EV1 came along and redefined how things were provisioned, and they conquered parts of the market. And then now you've had Amazon come along again and conquer a significant part of the market. And so maintaining the status quo is no longer acceptable. You need to look at changing. And our key belief in this is it's all about differentiation. And that's not being proprietary, that's not making it impossible for your customer to move away from you, because trust me, if you do that, they'll realize that and warn people about not moving to you in the first place. It's about providing added value, providing additional services, expanding and offering additional services on top of just raw infrastructure that make you invaluable to that customer, so they don't see you as a cost center. Because as they move more and more work from traditional IT out to service providers, they will start trying to treat you like you are their IT provider, their internal IT, and that's a good thing for service providers, in that you can deliver added value, you can charge higher margins, you can actually improve your margins, and ultimately generate higher revenues and better results. The agility difference, forget everything else I've just said about offering better services, improving margins, everything else. Forget even that if you were to not do any of that, one of the primary reasons we actually set out to build our platform to begin with wasn't just to solve those use cases for the customers. Forget the customers. It was about solving the pain points for ourselves. It was not having to be running down to data centers at 2 o'clock in the morning and sit on the cold floor in the horrible air conditioning for 3 hours trying to debug a problem with the server, because there was no easy way to fail that server over. It was not having to repeatedly schedule out-of-hours maintenance to upgrade customers because there was no easy way to move workloads around. It was solving all those problems. And ultimately, I'll jump forward and back here. That's what leads to happier staff, and happier customers, happier staff, and better margins. Because doing all this stuff manually, people may be a little short-sighted about it and think, well, hang on, this is my job here, but actually sitting and spending all your time installing servers and provisioning servers and racking them and deracking is not much of a job. Upskill, go and do something more interesting and get some technology to actually help you do that. And ultimately, one of the key things that this does, and all this does, is decreases time to revenue, or what we call TTR. Because if you remember right back at the beginning, I talked about how you might have a customer and they have a particular specification, and you take 3 weeks to work out the specification with the customer, and then you have to get the servers racked and installed and the software installed and configured, and you will have anywhere from a few days to a month that could take with some companies. That is revenue that you will never get back. It doesn't matter how long that customer is with you, you've lost that for good. And so simply by being able to provision that quicker, you are gaining money you would never have had. So these are all important points to think about. I think I have probably talked just about enough for now. So I will wrap it up there, but I'm really interested if there's any questions. Anyone disagrees with me, that's just as interesting as well. So I will pass back to Liam.
Thanks, Tony. Let me actually ask, before we start, and I would like to again invite everyone to submit their questions now through the question control panel in the webinar software. Let me ask, is there a contact info that you could show? Or
oh, sure. Yeah, it was next slide. There you go.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that at the end. So just very quickly, a couple of useful things there. Here's the tiny little pitch bit. We've got a learning center which has got a whole bunch of white papers, videos, and case studies. And these are not pitching our product. These are pitching the problems, the circumstances that I've talked about, and about hopefully actually be genuinely useful to you. And if anyone is interested, that you can actually go and download a free trial of our software, and there's actually videos on the website as well, so you can see how it works as well. But if there's any questions at all, then by all means drop an email to sales or drop an email to me, just tony@flexiant.com as well. Thanks, Liam.
Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to ask about was, and I know you had made the distinction or you had sort of pointed out that the question frequently is asked, isn't cloud just VPS with marketing? And you had said that no, there are, and you were careful to point out that there are plenty of use cases for VPS, but that the cloud was obviously something very different in your opinion with the burstability and other effects. Could you sort of run us through a couple of the key points that you see as being the major distinctions between one and the other?
Well, sure. So ultimately, VPSs, in my mind, are still a way of providing an intermediate step between a shared hosting account and a dedicated server, because you have customers that need a little bit more resource. They don't want to pay the full amount for a dedicated server, so a VPS type model works very well for them. It has its own problems as well, in that all of a sudden they might have to manage it, but there's companies selling managed VPSs, so we'll ignore that particular point. Nothing about a VPS particularly actually gives you agility. Depending on different companies sell it in different ways, but for example, if you suddenly, let's take the pig farm, for example, or the website that got slash-dotted. A lot of these VPS companies turning around and being able to say, okay, I need 10,000% capacity, but I just need it for the next 24 hours. Now, some of them might be able to do that. An awful lot of them, the answer is no, or oh my god, my website's getting hit with traffic now, I need more capacity now. All right, well, we need to move you to a new server to do that, so we need to shut your machine down and then copy the data, and it'll be down for about half an hour, and then we can bring it back up with 4 times the RAM. Well, sorry, this is my traffic now. I need it this second. I need it. Well, I can maybe wait a couple of minutes, but I can't wait half an hour for it. And I certainly can't wait for my website to be down for that half an hour. So it's those kind of flexibility problems. And I am generalizing. Not all VPS providers are the same, and it's certainly a viable business model for certain customer markets. But that's the kind of thing I see.
Okay, so I guess in terms of looking at this in the terms that you use of the journey into the cloud for a hosting provider, I guess is cloud something that you and let's talk specifically from not necessarily from the point of view of your product, but from the point of view of your customers, people who are using your product to build a cloud solution. Is cloud something that you move your existing customers onto? Is it something that you build up alongside your existing services? Is it something that you can build as an addition to that? I'd love to hear about what you see as the models that make the most sense for people who are right now operating the kind of hosting provider that you were describing before.
Well, we've pretty much seen all of those models used. We've seen different techniques, and most of these companies that are using our software long term are looking to have all of their customers running on it, their existing customers as well. But they're all dipping their toe in different ways. So some of them are setting up completely new brands and selling it that way. Some of them are migrating their traditional VPS customers onto it, but doing it bit by bit, so over sort of 6 months or so. And then what they'll slowly do is open up additional functionality, because one of the key things to remember, you don't particularly want to scare the customer off and go, oh my god, all of a sudden you've got a million new options that the customers don't know what to do with, because the customers will just ignore them anyway. So some of it should get the customers migrated over and then slowly enable new features and show them off. And what that also means is that it reduces the risk to the service provider of how their revenue model changes, because one of the key things in this as well is that you need to think, you don't necessarily need to change your revenue model as well. I'm not saying that everything needs to be completely pay as you go, by any means, but it's something to think about. And then we've got other companies, for example, that have over time got 3 or 4. One particular company we're talking to has got 9 different virtualization platforms because they acquired several other companies, and they're kind of looking and going, well, this is madness. We need to actually merge them all into one. And so they're actually using it to simplify their entire architecture. So we're pretty much seeing all of the different scenarios you described from different companies. And there's no particular one that's any better than any other. It's really what suits the company the best, depending on where they are in their life cycle and their journey in cloud.
Okay. I guess I was kind of interested in the scenario you described, where one of your customers was selling VPS servers alongside, the cloud service. Can you describe sort of how they position that? And actually, I'd love for you to share some advice on how a hosting provider, communicates the value of cloud service to hosting customers, especially when, as you mentioned, the term cloud has been kind of obscured and in some cases means internet to some people.
I'm trying to remember here what's public information, what's not, so I will deliberately tread carefully. So basically, these guys have two completely different customer bases, and they had the cloud business and the VPS business before they took off when they took off to fix some problems that they had with their existing homegrown solution. And so those customer bases were sold their products based on particular use cases that that company advertised. So one of the key things was the VPSs, they actually wanted them on local storage because they found that a lot of their customers actually wanted them to use local storage for the VMs, which is not very cloud-like. Those use cases don't make sense. Whereas, for example, the cloud and their customers pay, I think, monthly, and it's the cloud VPS I was talking about. It's VPS on a monthly basis. And those customers like that because for those customers, it is right now just about having my own little pot of resources that's sitting there quite happily that I'm paying the same amount every month for. I may not use all of it every month, but I know that the bill I'm going to have come in every time is consistent. And for a lot of us, that's really important. And you can't forget that because, for example, one of the football clubs that we had as a client, I always remember we were describing this platform back to them years and years ago, and we were describing how it was flexible, scale, it was all going to be great, and it would dynamically scale up to match what they needed. And they're like, yep, we love it, we're all on board for it. The only thing we need to make sure of is the price does change. And we're like, ooh, okay, so you want flexible capacity, but you don't want the price to change. Well, that's a bit tricky. So we actually turn around and said, the only way we can do that is make an assumption about what you will use and then add something on top as a safety measure. So you're actually going to end up paying more. And they said, well, that's fine. But there's a way we can predict it. So for their models, they wanted predictable costs, whereas you've got other customers who won't care about predictable cost. They more care about having a scalable solution, and if their bill some months is higher than other months, it doesn't matter. And I don't say that in a flippant way because some people might think, well, that's bad. But what's the chances this particular football club's phone bill was the same every month? I bet it wasn't. I bet they had no idea what their phone bill was going to be every month. But they were quite prepared to pay for that as a utility because they knew that if they needed to use it, they'd use it and they'd pay for it based on they use it. Some of it's a perception thing. It's just getting used to that fact. And some of it's about governance models as well, because one thing that scares some of these customers that want to 50 per month is, or rather like the agility of a cloud platform, but they're scared of the bill is, well, how do I make sure that I don't end up spending $1 million when I spend $1,000? And all these issues that service providers need to make sure they're addressing.
All right.
But just on the flip side of that, the cloud customers these guys have got, what they're looking for is agility. That's what it's all about for them. It's about them being able to spin things out rapidly and reconfigure them and spin them down again potentially rapidly because they pay the hour. And yes, they may end up paying more if they leave it running for the entire month than they would if it was just a VPS, but that's what you get for having the agility.
Okay. So I've got one more question I'd love to ask is when you have people kicking the tires on this sort of I guess partly on the technology, but I guess partly they're doing it to a whole new business model. How much for the typical hosting provider, how much weight does the efficiencies that are going to be internal to their business carry, and how much of it is about, as you mentioned before, solving specific pain points for customers? I mean, is it a 50-50 balance, or, I mean, how do you see that falling?
Cliched answer, but it does depend on the service provider, how it changes. It does change depending on each one. In general, it's more about the new revenue models. It's more about being able to grow as a business than it is these days about the savings and the efficiency savings. But what we tend to find quite often is a lot of these companies don't realize the capabilities that actually exist in our software and in other companies' software, that how they can actually help solve these problems as well. And so they start off looking at as, how do we deliver cloud services? And maybe coming back to your previous question, they're sitting there thinking about it as being a new line of business and maybe a new brand. And then they look at the technology and they look at their existing processes and they look at how they currently deploy things, and quite a few of them end up going, hang on, we can make this software pay for itself purely in the efficiency gains that we're going to get. Even if we use it, for example, coming back to VPS, using our software like ours to actually deploy the VPSs, they're already doing VPS before, but the company, well, I can name them, it's public information, a company in the US called Kartika. They've actually done a very nice quote they've done for us, in which they said that their return on investment in deploying our software was literally 1 month because of the internal efficiencies they gave them. Now, that's awesome. I'd never claim a month myself. Even a few months, 6 months is awesome. 1 month is ridiculously good. And so they don't always come into it looking for those efficiencies, but when they discover that they exist, then it quite often becomes a powerful catalyst for doing it. So coming back to this other customer that we're talking to at the moment, they've got 9 different platforms, and so managing these 9 different platforms is a real headache. And so what their thoughts are is, even if we don't sell any new services, if we can harmonize all these 9 platforms, and maybe there's 4 different hypervisor choices in that, and get the benefits of a platform like ours, and I will say, and/or another cloud, and/or one of our competitors, I'm not trying to ram our product down people's throats here, then actually forget about providing any new services. We can make it pay for itself. And so it's quite often not necessarily the first thing they look for, but it ends up becoming quite important.
Okay, well, that's everything that I've got down that I wanted to ask about. We're pretty close to the end of the hour. I don't know if you feel like this is maybe a good moment to wrap things up.
Yeah, no, I think that was good. I hope people found value in it, and I look forward to getting some feedback, good or bad. Please send it my way either way.
All right, well, let me just wrap things up here. That's about all the time that we had planned out for today, so I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and of course I would like to thank Tony for taking us through a subject that I think is, it's a really big opportunity for hosting providers. It's a little bit of a threat in a sense, and I think it's really front of mind for a lot of providers today. So thank you very much, Tony, for some of that info, and everyone have a great day.